A beautiful story. In a small sun-drenched town nestled between rolling hills and the shimmering sea, there was a little bookstore. Its shelves were lined with well-loved novels, their pages worn from the touch of many hands. The shop smelled of paper, ink, and a hint of vanilla from the cafe next door. In the heart of this cozy store, a girl named Clara worked. She loved the quiet solitude of her job, the way each book seemed to hold an entire world inside, waiting to be discovered. Clara had always believed that books held the most beautiful stories. They were windows into the lives she could never live, experiences she could only dream of. And yet there was a part of her that longed for a story of her own, something extraordinary, something that would be worth telling one day. She spent her days helping customers find the perfect read, organizing the shelves, and occasionally getting lost in the pages herself. It was a peaceful life, but sometimes, especially during the quiet afternoons when the sunlight filtered through the shop's windows just right, Clara wondered if there was something more out there waiting for her. Then one chilly autumn day, a stranger walked into the bookstore. He had a quiet, unassuming presence, tall with dark hair that fell over his forehead and a look in his eyes that suggested he was always somewhere else, deep in thought. He lingered by the poetry section, running his fingers over the spines of the books as if searching for something he couldn't quite name. Clara watched him from behind the counter, intrigued. She had seen many people come and go, but there was something about this man that drew her attention. Perhaps it was the way he seemed lost, or perhaps it was the quiet sadness that hovered around him like a shadow. After a few minutes, the man approached the counter, holding a worn copy of Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. "Is this one any good?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Clara smiled. "It's one of my favorites," she replied. "It's about life, art, and love. The kind of book that makes you feel like the world is a little bit more beautiful after you have read it." He smiled, and for a brief moment, the sadness in his eyes seemed to lift. "I could use a little beauty in my life right now." Clara hesitated for a moment, sensing the weight behind his words. "Is everything all right?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. The man looked down at the book, tracing the cover with his thumb. "I lost someone recently," he said quietly. "Someone very close to me. And it's strange, you know, how you can be surrounded by all these stories, beautiful, tragic, hopeful, but none of them seem to touch your own grief." Clara felt her heart squeeze. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It's hard to find the right words sometimes, even in books. But maybe that's why we keep reading, hoping that someday we'll stumble upon the story that does." The man looked at her, his gaze searching, as if her words had reached a place he had long kept hidden. "Maybe you're right," he murmured. "Maybe that's what I'm looking for, a story that makes sense of it all." Over the next few weeks, the man, whose name Clara eventually learned was Julian, became a regular at the bookstore. He would come in, browse the shelves, and sometimes they would talk. Their conversations started as small exchanges about books, but quickly deepened into something more. They spoke about life, about loss, and about the things that kept them going when everything seemed too heavy to bear. Clara found herself looking forward to the moments they spent together, even if they were fleeting. There was something about Julian that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt before. And as the days grew shorter and the evenings darker, something unspoken but undeniable began to grow between them, a quiet connection, delicate but real. One rainy afternoon, as the shop was about to close, Julian lingered by the door. The rain tapped softly against the windows, and the sky outside was a deep, moody gray. "Clara," he said, turning to face her, "do you ever wonder if your life could be one of those beautiful stories you read about?" Clara blinked, surprised by the question. "I used to," she admitted. "But sometimes it feels like those stories are only meant for the pages of books. Real life is messy." Julian smiled, a gentle warmth in his eyes. "Maybe. But I think the most beautiful stories are the ones that don't always make sense. The ones that are a little bit messy, but full of hope anyway." He took a step closer, his voice low, almost hesitant. "And I think maybe we're in the middle of one right now." Clara's breath caught in her throat. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stir inside her, a quiet, fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't meant to spend her life on the sidelines, watching other people's stories unfold. "I think you might be right," she whispered. Julian reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm, as if to say that whatever story they were about to create, they would write it together. And in that moment, surrounded by the smell of old books and the sound of rain softly falling outside, Clara realized that sometimes the most beautiful stories aren't found in books at all. Sometimes they're the ones you live.